across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View, and looking forward to this interview for some time. As we even mentioned last week, we're privileged to have with us Dr. Robert Morgan. Heard him recently on a program talking about his book, 100 Bible Verses That Made America, something we've quoted many times, and I actually grabbed my personal copy of that and told my producer that if we could get him on before the 4th of July, that would be great, because there's so many great stories that he has to tell in that book and many others. He, of course, is a Bible teacher, podcaster, individual that has served as the associate pastor of the World Outreach Church there in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Of course, this book, 100 Bible Verses That Made America, 50 Final Events in World History, Then Sings My Soul. Of course, the Red Sea Rules and that whole series as well. It is always a delight and a privilege to welcome back to the microphone Robert Morgan.
Thank you, Kerby. You know, we've been talking for a long time, many years, you and me, and I always enjoy it.
Well, I follow you quite a bit on Instagram, and I noticed that you had surgery on your hand, and I thought we might talk about that for just a minute, because I would encourage our listeners to pray for you, and I know that that's something you've had to think through, and this is something that you're going through right now, and hope that you're having a good recovery.
Well, my mother taught me how to type. She was the typing instructor at the high school that I went to, and I didn't realize when I was taking her typing classes how important that would be to my livelihood, because, you know, I'm a writer. But for the last 6 months or so, my fingers haven't worked. I have a condition called Dupuytren's contracture, and it just makes my hands curl up, and they've tried different treatments, and it hasn't worked. So I have my right hand sliced open and repaired, and I've got all these bandages on it right now. And as soon as it's healed, then I've got to do the same thing on my left hand. But, you know, in terms of all the things that can be wrong with you, I'm very fortunate, Kerby, and I'm just using this as sort of as an experiment to see how many things I can still do for myself without the use of my hands, without being aggravated or irritated. So I appreciate everyone's prayers. I'm doing fine.
Yes. Well, again, I just might mention that. I've said this to my wife before, that if I ever even sprained a finger playing basketball or something like that, I live on the typewriter as well. And because, you're typing daily commentaries, weekly comments, booklets, books, articles, all sorts of things. And I think through my fingers typing on the keys. Little did I know that when I was taking a typing class, I'd be using it so much on computers. But again, you and I both know how essential it is to be able to have all 10 fingers working on that keyboard. So you have produced so many great books. And the other day I was looking for a book in our house, and as I would pull up stacks of books, every time I come across another Robert Morgan book, you have so many in our household and so many that you've published. But I did want to spend some time today, if we could, talking about some of your favorite stories out of 100 Bible verses. I thought we'd talk about the Pilgrims and the Puritans. I certainly want to talk about Alexander Hamilton. I love your story about that. Noah Webster, Ronald Reagan, and some others. And just try to see if we can encourage people to learn more about her history. But in each particular chapter, what you do is you take some event in history, and maybe we'll start with the Mayflower Compact, September 22nd, 1620, and you give us a little bit of history and then a verse. But the Mayflower Compact is really essential because, as you well know, and I'll let you tell the rest of the story, the Pilgrims were blown off course, or maybe even taken off course, and so they did not have a charter for where they were going to establish their colony, and so they wrote what many people call the first Constitution in America. But tell us more, if you might.
Yes, Kerby. Well, the British tried to colonize the New World on the Outer Banks of North Carolina with the Lost Colony, and then in 1619 with Jamestown, which was a secular pursuit. It was not a Christian operation. It's where so many people blame slavery in America with coming in 1619 in Jamestown. But the very next year, 1620, the Pilgrims came on the Mayflower. And I think even as much as we talk about this in our schools, we've underestimated the impact this had. This was the beginning of the Puritan migration, because in England, some of the most brilliant people of the United Kingdom, graduates mainly of Cambridge University, businessmen and lawyers and attorneys and political leaders and pastors and theologians and academicians, they were driven out of England because of their belief, their Puritan beliefs. And they came to the New World. And so beginning with the Pilgrims in 1620, for the next 20, 25 years, there was a migration of Pilgrims and Puritans to the New World that populated New England and spread down from there, and which established the Judeo-Christian worldview that America was built upon, was based upon. And as you said, they left Holland for England and then on to America. John Robinson, the pastor, preached a farewell sermon from Ezra chapter 8, verse 21, in which that's the verse that talks about praying for safety for the upcoming journey of the Israelites. And then they came on to England. They boarded the Mayflower. It was a creaky little miserable boat. It went through tremendous storms. They would have just about given up in the middle of the storms had it not been for Psalm 107, which they read, and it has to do with God stilling the waves and stilling the storms and giving the mariners a safe harbor at last. And so they finally sailed into Cape Cod, into what we now know as the Boston area, and they established that Mayflower covenant that says, in the name of God, amen, we whose names are underwritten, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, as they thought, do by these documents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic.
Yes.
And that was the beginning of constitutional government and self-government in the United States. And it was with people that had a Bible in their hands and who knew every page of it, much of it by heart.
Yes. Let's take a break. When we come back, we've been talking about the Pilgrims and, of course, already mentioned the Puritans. Pilgrims were separatists. They wanted to separate from the Church of England. The Puritans wanted to purify that. And that'll get us into the idea of a city on a hill and then some of the other great stories that come from this as well, because we wanted you to know a little bit about the founding of America, but also the framing of America through the Constitution. And we'll get into some of those notable individuals. It's all part of this book, which of course you can find out more by going to our website, 100 Bible Verses That Made America. Certainly you can get it there. Of course, I noticed something very interesting. David Jeremiah is making it available to his people as well. So a lot of people recognize how important this book is. We'll continue our conversation with Robert J. Morgan right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Former Senator Ben Sasse has been in the news recently because he's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. But even with this diagnosis, he has been speaking and writing. His latest op-ed warns that the indoor childhood is bad for America. Now, we know that the current digital revolution is changing nearly every aspect of modern life, but the issue, he believes, is greater than screen time. He points to a larger problem. American children are being weirdly held hostage indoors. A recent survey from the Institute for Family Studies discovered that a majority of 6-year-olds have unsupervised access to internet-connected tablets, but that same majority are not allowed to play in their own yards unsupervised. It doesn't get much better for older kids. More than half of 14-year-olds don't have permission to leave their streets. He laments that we aren't introducing children to a world in an age-appropriate manner. Instead, we are preventing them from developing imagination, resilience, and grit. They can explore the dark corners of the internet but cannot explore their own neighborhoods. Parents are ignoring one danger in one area and overprotecting in another. He reminds us that 11 of the 12 Apollo astronauts who walked on the moon were Boy Scouts who learned to live by the Scouts' motto, "Be prepared." Unfortunately, we are not raising a generation of risk-takers today. Children need to learn from low-risk failures. Instead, they're being tossed into the deep end of adulthood with little preparation. The children aren't at fault. The parents are failing their children and the next generation. The solution starts at home. It's time to get children outdoors. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We always learn so much from Robert J. Morgan, and again, the book is entitled 100 Bible Verses That Made America. We have information about that. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, published by Thomas Nelson, but we have information if you can't find it directly, and certainly would encourage you to read it and maybe share it with your children and grandchildren. As I've already said in some of my commentaries, I hope that you, on the 4th of July, will read the Declaration of Independence to your children and grandchildren, because this is something they need to know. Well, we were talking about the Pilgrims. Let's talk about the Puritans. The idea of a city on a hill, which is, of course, quoted so many times, all the way up to Ronald Reagan and others, in which you had John Winthrop borrowing from Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus talks about the fact that you are the light of the world, a city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. And John Winthrop talks about the idea that in some respects we should be considered, shall be the city upon a hill, the eyes of all people are upon us. This phrase, city on a hill, is something that has lasted for more than almost 300 years, and yet it goes back to Scripture, but it also goes back to the Puritans, doesn't it?
It does. John Winthrop was one of those Puritans, Cambridge educated. He was an attorney, a brilliant lawyer, who was driven out of England, and he got his children and family on board the Arabella, and as they were sailing to America, apparently it was during that time that he wrote this sermon or this essay in which he gave a vision for what he thought this new world should be, this new society that was being formed among the Puritans in New England. And he said that if we obeyed the Lord and kept the Bible as the foundation for what we did, he said, quote, people will say the Lord will make it like that of New England, for we must consider that we shall be a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. So he was quoting from Matthew 5, which really is a description of the church. But in his mind, Winthrop and these Puritans who were coming over were establishing a society that would reflect the values of the Bible, and in that way be a city. And Reagan used to, he always put the adjective in there, a shining city on a hill.
Yes.
And that was the vision for those who helped establish the foundation of our nation.
Well, we can talk about some pastors. And of course, one of the more famous one of the 18th century was Jonathan Edwards. One of your chapters is about America's most famous sermon, and there is a reference to Deuteronomy 32, their foot shall slip in due time. While reading this message to his congregation, many people credit this, and of course George Whitefield and others, with creating what we today call the First Great Awakening. But it does seem to me that there was a need to talk about the most famous sermon in American history.
It is the most famous sermon in American history, and it did help to ignite the Great Awakening. Kerby, I think it's very important that people realize that this revival that swept through all 13 colonies, the Great Awakening, it occurred about 100 years after the Puritan migration. Puritanism and a zeal for the Lord had died down in the colonies, but Edwards and Whitefield and others during this time of tremendous revival rekindled it, or the Holy Spirit rekindled it under their efforts. And it was this Great Awakening that swept over all 13 colonies and united them emotionally and spiritually, and paved the way for the unity and the zeal for a freedom of religion that was necessary for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Many historians believe there would never have been a Declaration of Independence without the Great Awakening. And this particular sermon that was only one of many sermons that Jonathan Edwards, who was America's greatest theologian, he was generally very positive. But this particular sermon was about hell, and it was based on Deuteronomy 32:35, their foot will slip in due time. And he had no idea the impact it was going to have. He stood in the pulpit and read it, and the Holy Spirit came upon the people in that church, and they began sensing they were sliding into hell. They began screaming. They began holding on to the pews and falling down into the floor. And it was just remarkable, the effect that came over people. And that was one of the essential moments that make up the spiritual revival that revitalized the colonies and prepared them to move forward against England and to secure for themselves not only freedom of religion, but freedom for self-government.
Again,
so the Great Awakening and these preachers, they were very important in what they did.
The connection very, very strong, and I think you can make that. One of the articles I've posted, Robert Morgan, which we'll probably talk about more in the second hour, is by our good friend Jerry Newcomb on the pastors and the American Revolution. And, of course, one aspect of that gets into a very famous message given by John Witherspoon, which you entitle When Politics Got into the Pulpit. If people have my booklet on a biblical point of view on America's godly heritage, we talk about this idea of the dominion of providence over the passions of men, and that comes from Psalm 76. So even as late as 1776, this was May of 1776, before we actually have the Declaration, there were still some people, including Witherspoon himself, that weren't sure that we should separate from England. And here you refer to it as when politics got into the pulpit, and the influence of this man who was at the time the president of the College of New Jersey, now we call it Princeton, nevertheless was one of those very instrumental people as well.
Well, that's right. These Puritan preachers in the pulpits, they were very, very instrumental because they were communicating to the people a love for the Lord and a love for liberty and religious liberty that established the basis for it. Now, John Witherspoon was a remarkable man. He was an educator. He began advocating for liberty very, very early. He was one of the first ones in 1776 who began preaching for the establishing of a Declaration of Independence that led up to that point. And his famous sermon was preached in Princeton. But the key thing back then was that the primary Puritan sermons were not just preached to a local audience. They were really prepared to be printed for distribution. And so they went everywhere and were read by everyone. And Witherspoon's sermon was based on Psalm 26 and verse 10, which says, "Surely the wrath of man shall praise you. With the reminder of your wrath, you shall gird yourself." And he said, as he closed the message, I don't have time to read the whole thing, but he said, "You are all witnesses that this is the first time of my introducing any political subject into the pulpit. At this season, however, it is not only lawful, but necessary, and I willingly embrace the opportunity of declaring my opinion without any hesitation that the cause in which America is now in arms is the cause of justice, of liberty, and of human nature. And he quoted the scripture, "Be of good courage, and let us behave ourselves valiantly for our people, and let the Lord do that which is good in his sight." So he was later elected to the Continental Congress and was appointed the Congregational Chaplain by John Hancock.
Mm-hmm.
He signed the Declaration of Independence. He was one of those who wasn't afraid to speak politically. And Kerby, I just want to say to every pastor who is out there, we don't have to be political. Our goal in the pulpit is not to be political, but we cannot avoid preaching on moral and biblical issues, even if they have political implications. I think we have a society that is longing to hear what the Bible has to say about issues that may have political implications. We don't deal with them for the sake of politics, but we want to exhort people to follow the Bible because that is for their health and for their well-being and for the well-being of our nation.
Let's take a break, and I might just mention that the article that I did mention by Jerry Newcomb goes into what is called the Black Robed Regiment. They were called that by the British because, of course, the pastors wore a black robe, and they were seen as so significant. And, of course, we even have a quote there from the book by Reverend Dan Fisher, who is in Oklahoma. And, of course, I mentioned that in one of our booklets on a biblical point of view on the Patriot Preachers. But we'll come back and get into a couple of other very important stories. This is all part of the book, 100 Bible Verses That Made America. And if you would like to find a copy of it, you probably can find it in your local bookstore. But if not, we have given you information so that you can order it there. As you go to the website, which has been newly changed and updated, we have a section where it says Restoring America's Godly Heritage. If you click on that button, I wanted you to know that as we are coming to the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, we actually have a match on the table, so that means your gift will be matched. And if you would want to click on that button, you could give right now, and it's a dollar for dollar match. We'll talk more about that later, right after these important messages.
Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. Not my words. That's Ronald Reagan. And he was right. We can't take our freedom for granted. For 250 years, those words in our Declaration of Independence, acknowledging the human rights granted to all of us by our Creator, have guided and inspired generations of Americans to protect the torch of freedom and pass it on to us. But will we pass that torch to the next generation? You can join a team dedicated to doing just that. In fact, Point of View has been passing on freedom and the biblical values that support it for over 50 years. Join us this month, and any donation you give will be doubled. Give at pointofview.net or call us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Really stay with us for a little bit longer. Robert J. Morgan. The book is entitled 100 Bible Verses That Made America, Defining Moments That Shaped Our Enduring Foundation of Faith. And again, if you are interested in the book, first of all, it's published by our good friends at Thomas Nelson. Probably can find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we have a link so that you can get it either in hardback or paperback, and I do encourage you to get a copy of that. Read these stories to your children and grandchildren. I don't care if if you majored in American history, you're going to learn some things that you've perhaps never heard before. We're going to, in just a few minutes, talk about some of the favorite stories that I know Robert Morgan likes to talk about. Alexander Hamilton, Noah Webster. We'll bring it all the way up to, of course, the contemporary times. But I thought for just a minute we might focus on the prayer that saved the Constitution. And the reason is, as we encouraged, Robert, a number of people to go to the movie A Great Awakening, which is a wonderful film that talks about the story and the relationship between George Whitefield and Benjamin Franklin. Near the end, there is this famous message given by Benjamin Franklin when there was great contention right there after having the Articles of Confederation. Now they're trying to develop a constitution. Benjamin Franklin, at the age of 81, gives this message, which is really based on Psalm 127. Can you finish this for us?
Absolutely. And I'm watching The Great Awakening now. I haven't finished it, but I've been watching it. It's so good. This was when the Constitutional Convention had just fallen into disarray in 1787, and it was just a mess. There was no agreement on anything, and that's when Benjamin Franklin rose and he gave that famous, one of the greatest pieces of oratory in all of American history. And he said, I have lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, how is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain who build it. And he proposed that they have a chaplain come and lead the Constitutional Convention in prayer. But even that motion failed. But a few days later, on July the 4th, 1787, General Washington led the delegates to a prayer service down the street at Philadelphia's Reformed Calvinist Lutheran Church, and William Rogers offered a prayer, and I have the prayer in my book that he offered. He closes it by just praying. We close this, our solemn address, by saying, as our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ has taught us, our Father who art in heaven. And all of the delegates joined together in the Lord's Prayer, and then they went back to work, and soon they have a document that began, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. And James Madison later wrote about the event. He said, it is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in it a finger of that almighty hand, which has been so frequently and singly extended to our relief in the critical states of the revolution. So it was prayer that saved the Constitutional Convention, and it was Benjamin Franklin who proposed it.
Great story. Let's, if we can, pick up a few that I know you've talked about before, and I think these would all be new information to our listeners. One, Noah Webster and his dictionary. First of all, we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to an individual, well-educated, who was, in a sense, trying to put down the English dictionary, and in some respects, this connects up to some of the passages in the book of Acts, doesn't it?
It does, and I love the story of Noah Webster. He was an absolute failure at everything that he tried to do. He grew. He lived during the 1800s, after the Constitution and during the early days of our nation, but he just was not successful at anything. And he decided he would write this dictionary of the American language. And he worked at a round table in the second floor study of his home from sunrise until 4 p.m, working all day, but the mental strain just broke him down, and he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But then the oddest thing happened, Kerby. His daughters came to faith in Christ during the Second Great Awakening. His daughters were saved. And when he found out about it, he was alarmed, and he went to the pastor, nearby pastor, Moses Stewart, who led him to faith in Christ. And it was his Christian faith that gave him what he called the perfect tranquility of mind that allowed him to finish his dictionary, which was published in 1828. And he constantly referred back to the Bible in that dictionary.
Yes.
And it was that dictionary that shaped the American English, that shaped the American language, the reason why we sound different from people in the UK, and the reason why sometimes we use language differently. It goes back to Noah Webster, and we wouldn't have our American English if it hadn't been for a conversion that took place during the Second Great Awakening.
That's one of the things I love about your book, because I think many of us knew about Noah Webster and all the things that he accomplished, but it was really his conversion that kept him from wanting to eventually go to an insane asylum or something. And another one that I thought we would mention, because I've heard you mention it before, is the death of Alexander Hamilton. Now, of course, Alexander Hamilton's getting a little more famous because of Broadway, but even before that, if you look at, for example, I have a little booklet we make available to our donors on a biblical point of view on the Federalist Papers, written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, who you just mentioned a minute ago, and John Jay, who actually later became the president of the American Bible Society, was a governor of the state of New York. But Alexander Hamilton was a very significant individual, both in the American Revolution, then as Treasury Secretary, but then got crossways with Aaron Burr. Most people know the story of him in a duel, but you kind of fill out some of the details that most people don't know.
Well, yes, I went to see Hamilton, the Broadway show, and frankly, I was disappointed. I am disappointed at most renditions of American history because they totally leave out anything and everything that is biblical or secular about it. And what people don't know, what was not in the movie, is that after Hamilton was shot, he didn't die immediately, but they brought him across the Hudson River and put him in a cottage in Greenwich Village, what is today Greenwich Village, and he wanted to see a pastor. He knew he was dying, and he wanted to make sure that his soul was right with Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And he wanted to take communion. And the first pastor who came would not give him communion because at that point in this man's ministry, communion had only been something that was done within a church with a group of people there. And so Hamilton said, get me another pastor. And so another pastor came and asked him. The pastor's name was Moore, M-O-O-R-E. Moore said to him, do you sincerely repent of your past sins? Do you have a living faith in God's mercy through Jesus Christ and a thankful remembrance of the death of Christ? Are you disposed to live in loving charity with all men? And Hamilton raised his hands towards heaven and said, with the utmost sincerity of heart, I can answer those questions in the affirmative. I have no ill will against Colonel Burr, and I forgive all that happened. And he took communion. His children and wife were around his bed, and his last words were to his wife as he was dying. He said, remember, my Eliza, you are a Christian. And that was the last word he spoke. And then, as a biographer said, he passed away from the earth, one of the most gifted, powerful, and illustrious spirits which had ever figured upon the great and wondrous stage of human affairs.
So again, just great stories that come from this book, 100 Bible Verses That Made America. We come back from a break. Before we get to the story, I would love to have certainly Robert Morgan talk about Ronald Reagan. I thought we would do some clarification for those of you that tend to watch Fox News. There is a program that Laura Trump does, and the other day she went to Philadelphia, and while she was there, the individual was showing her around and mentioned the Liberty Bell, and just in passing mentioned, well, it has a verse from the Hebrew text. And I thought, wait a minute, can't we at least mention Leviticus? So for just a minute, we might try to clarify what was actually somewhat obscure in that tour of Philadelphia, which is, again, one of the reasons why you might want to have this book and others with you as maybe this year you decide to go to Washington, D.C. or Monticello or Mount Vernon or Philadelphia, wherever it might be, because sometimes you get much more of the story through a book like 100 Bible Verses That Made America. So we'll come back and clarify that and then end with this remarkable letter by Ronald Reagan. We'll talk about that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we continue our conversation with Robert J. Morgan. And again, the book is entitled 100 Bible Verses That Made America. Also have a link to robertjmorgan.com. As you go there, you'll see his bookstore as well as his podcast and all the media that he does. Might just mention they're going to have a Then Sings My Soul 2027 tour, and you may be interested in that. So all of that is available at our website, or you can simply go to robertjmorgan.com. But Robert, for just a minute, I felt a little disappointed that when I was watching Laura Trump talk with this guide in Philadelphia, he showed the Liberty Bell and did tell the story about it being broken apart and recast a number of times, but he said it had a Hebrew inscription on it. And I thought you should fill in the rest of the story, because the inscription is Leviticus 25, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all inhabitants. And it's just a good illustration of why someone needs your book, because you may not get the full story even from the individuals giving the tour.
That's right, and it's put on the bell in English. It's from Leviticus 25:20, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants. The bell does have an interesting biography. It was cast in London and shipped to America, and then it cracked, and it was broken up and recast, and this time it didn't ring. And then it was smashed to pieces again, melted down, and recast. And the third version is the one that has this verse and was rang and was rang in Philadelphia to announce, to call people together to hear the reading of the Declaration of Independence. It was not called the Liberty Bell, though, until the days leading up to the Civil War. The abolitionist movement
Yes.
saw this inscription, proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants. And so they began using the Liberty Bell as a symbol of their movement, the abolitionist movement. That's where it got its name, the Liberty Bell. And when Abraham Lincoln was shot and was taken by train to Illinois, they stopped in Philadelphia, and his open casket was placed right in front of the Liberty Bell, and his head rested against the backdrop of that iconic Bible verse, proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants.
Again, I'm so glad you added the part of the abolitionist, and of course, Abraham Lincoln. Well, I also have learned from your book and from some of the interviews you've done in the past about Ronald Reagan's remarkable letter. I grew up in California, and my father had actually run for the California Assembly. I've got a signature from Governor Ronald Reagan, and certainly he was my governor, later my president. But I did not know of this letter, and that is tied to, of course, the verse that most people know, John 3:16. But tell us more, if you might.
Well, as I was writing this book, actually, I got wind of the fact that after Nancy Reagan died, people had found a cardboard box in her closet, and there was a handwritten letter on White House stationery that Ronald Reagan had written on a Saturday afternoon during his presidency to Nancy's father, Loyal Davis, Loyal, Loyal Davis. And Davis was an atheist, but he was dying of cancer. So we asked the Reagan Presidential Foundation if we could include this letter in our book, and they gave us permission, provided we put the whole letter and didn't change anything, including the misspelled words or the strange punctuation. So we did. But in this letter, Ronald Reagan was begging his father-in-law, the atheist doctor, to turn his life over to Jesus Christ. And he spoke of Jesus as both God and man, who was predicted in the Old Testament, who impacted this world in a way that could never be imagined. And then Reagan quoted, I'll read from the letter directly. The Apostle John said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever," Reagan listed that as 3 words, "that whosoever believed in him would not perish but have everlasting life." And Reagan went on to say, we have been promised that all we have to do is ask God in Jesus' name to help when we have done all we can, when we've come to the end of our strength and abilities, and we'll have the help. We only have to trust and have faith in his infinite goodness and mercy. And he went on to just appeal to his father-in-law to place his faith in Jesus Christ. And this is the side of Reagan that no one would have known about,
That's right.
except that somebody found this letter in the cardboard box in Nancy's closet, and I happened to hear about it, and we managed to get it into this book in just the nick of time. It's an incredible evangelistic piece of presidential literature.
So many reasons why, of course, to get a copy of this book, so many insights from history. And, of course, we've only covered a few of the 100, and I would encourage you to read those. They will really encourage you in so many ways. But, Robert, you know, so often I point people to your website because I value, and my wife and I value your books so much. As I mentioned before, we have so many scattered around the household, as well as even in our bookshelf as well. And so as people go to robertjmorgan.com, they can find out about some of the events. I mentioned your tour next year, of course, your books, your podcast, all sorts of other resources. Most of these books are available in a bookstore, but if you can't find them, each one of them will benefit you in some way. And of course, you wrote this book a number of years ago, but it is amazing how many times people are still quoting from 100 Bible verses that made America, defining moments that shaped our enduring foundation of faith. And as always, it is an incredible delight and privilege to have you on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kerby. This tour next April is a hymns and church history tour of England. I think people would love it. We're going to sing the great hymns of the faith all along the way. And I hope everybody will buy a copy of this book, 100 Bible Verses That Made America, for their mayor, their city council member, and for a politician they know in their city.
Do need to educate a lot of individuals, but starting with us. So, Robert Morgan, as always, it is just a great delight to have you on the program, and I hope that you will heal well, get that other hand surgery done, and you'll be back to a full particular ministry that you will have, and it's just great to have you on the program with us today.
Always a pleasure. You're the best. Thank you, Kerby.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will get into some other issues. I have one interview, and then we're going to cover a variety of articles that I've posted for you. But let me just mention that as we come to the end of June, we, of course, encourage you to support this ministry. As you do, of course, there's some tremendous benefits. A regular monthly donor receives the Outlook magazine, and that one right now, which I'll hold up for those of you watching online, is Understanding America's Christian Heritage. It has a number of different authors in this particular special edition that we've created for the July issue. So that's one of the benefits. You've heard me mention these booklets. If you join at the Truth Team level, that's at least $1 a day, $30 a month or more, you will receive those booklets. And some of the most recent ones have been on the Declaration, America's Godly Heritage, some of the ones that we've just mentioned a few minutes ago. So those are benefits as well. But whether you can give to us on a monthly basis or even a one-time gift, I do want to point you to the website, pointofview.net. You will see a section there that talks about restoring America's godly heritage, and we have an opportunity for you, if you give, to actually have your gift doubled. So we have a match on the table. There's more than enough money right now to cover your gift. So if you would want to give ahead of time, I'm hoping not everybody's going to wait till June 29th and 30th. That's if we encourage a few of you to give now and start the ball rolling. That is possible. You can go to the website at pointofview.net. Of course, at any time, you can give us a call at 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. We'll be back right after this.
Will the American experiment endure? As we approach the 250th anniversary for our nation, we must recognize the answer to that question largely depends on us. In 1789, President George Washington said something important. He said, "America is an experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people." That means that our actions, our values, determine the course of our nation. Washington also argued that we can't expect blessings if we ignore God's moral order. If you want to help the American experiment endure, if you want to restore the moral foundation that made this nation strong, partner with Point of View. Your support equips listeners to live according to God's moral order and defend freedom for the future. Give this month and your gift will be doubled. Call or click today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, going to spend some time, first of all, talking about school chaplains, a topic we've covered before, but we'll revisit once again. Then the bottom of the hour, we're going to get back into some issues in the news. The editors of the Wall Street Journal lament the rise of democratic socialists. A columnist for the Washington Post nevertheless laments that socialism is back in vogue and wait for reality to set in. So whether you look at it from a conservative point of view or a liberal point of view, we'll get into some of that in the later bottom part of this hour, but we wanted to, first of all, once again, remind you of what you can do in your local school. Anytime you've listened to Point of View on Friday, we have Kelly Shackelford or others from First Liberty Institute reminding us that we have more freedom and more liberty than ever, and it has always been legal to have chaplains in school, but this is even easier. And so we thought we would bring back to the microphone an individual who's been in studio with us, Rocky Malloy, who is again the CEO of the National School Chaplain Association, which is a constitutionally compliant chaplaincy organization. He really has a vision of having a chaplain in every school, serves also as the chair of the advisory board for the United States Family Chaplaincy Network, has come from an interesting background of having ministered in the midst of a civil war among the Sandinistas, uprising in Bolivia, even dealing with rebel-held territory in Colombia on the Honduran-Nicaraguan border. But in 2021, 5 years ago, the family returned to this particular state to expand its proven model of national and school chaplaincies in the U.S. public school system. So, Rocky, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, last time we had you in here, we gave people an overview, but it's worth mentioning again because people come and go, and there is a link to NSCA, which stands for National School Chaplains Association .global, or you can just simply follow the links that we have there on the website. They can see your picture, and next to it, they can follow your web page, Facebook page, as well as X. But this is an opportunity to bring faith, hope, and transformation to the public schools. Can you tell us more?
Yes, it's so important the way you've staged this because for about 50 years we lived under an illusion in regard to our religious liberty. As you said, absolutely correctly, any school in the United States can hire a chaplain or allow a volunteer. So the laws that are being passed across the country in multiple states never put that in question. Those were laws that funded chaplains.
And it seems to me that what we have are a series of articles there that answer many of those questions. But if nothing else, do schools need help? Is this unconstitutional? Is there a way we can do this in our local school? So in some respects, there are going to be some people, I am sure, Rocky, that will say, I would love to have a chaplain in our local public school, and I need to figure out, first of all, what's the next step, and most importantly, how to answer any of the kind of objections I'm going to run into, and that's one of the reasons why we're pointing people to your website.
Thank you. The first thing they can do when they go to our website, there's a free course, a free introduction course that'll give them all the qualifications. There are some disqualifications, roles and responsibilities to give them a really good idea of what it's like to be the source of faith-based spiritual mental health care on a campus.
Now, it does seem to me that once you, and I might just also point them, there is a short little video there. It's only about 2 minutes long, Become a School Chaplain, so that might be a good way to get started. But again, the argument I think they're going to hear is, well, separation of church and state. Of course, that doesn't apply, as we've already dealt with. But I think the argument that you want to make is whether it's release time, whether it's the fact that students can have a Bible club, or in this case, the public school can have a actual chaplaincy. There are so many needs that are existing in a typical school, and it's unrealistic to think that the teachers can deal with all of that. And it's best to have somebody who has been trained to actually be a chaplain, who is available on call for all the kind of issues that young people and even families are going to be dealing with.
You mentioned there's some great organizations that provide off-campus, before school, after school, all types of things. But the advantage of a chaplain is during regular school hours, campus-wide, to help coordinate all those other great organizations working for the benefit of the schools. But one of the most important things a chaplain does is intercept bad behavior.
Yes.
Students hurting themselves or other people. Chaplains are specifically trained to recognize characteristics. And I can tell you that the federal marshals we've talked to in D.C. and other places have told us there's never been a surprise shooter. That people go, oh my God, why didn't they do something? They can't do anything until a law is broken. A chaplain is constitutionally privileged and protected to intercede. So because a policeman or a sheriff or a safety officer, they're concerned about litigation if they try to intercede and they're wrong or somebody's misinterpreted what they did. But a chaplain can step into a situation to prevent harm. Every mother and father in the United States should appreciate that.
I appreciate you using that example, because some people tend to think, well, a chaplain be there to hear kids that are dealing with anorexia or bulimia or bullying or whatever, all of which is true. But there is a much more serious issue, and that is individuals that are tempted to act out, whether they become the next school shooter, whether maybe at a lower level they are the vandal and destroy property or something of that nature. And a chaplain can intervene, as you just pointed out, when others cannot. True?
That's correct. There's some very specific laws around that. One is a chaplain, if they work with us, they can be federally recognized. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean a chaplain can break the law. But part of this thing is that people have confidence to talk to the chaplain because there's a thing called confidentiality. So other students and teachers tell the chaplain things that alert them to potential harm, and they can step in to prevent that. But if a student talks to a teacher, the teacher's required, we're not talking about mandatory report. We're just talking about things that go on their transcript. If you remember from high school, it was like the Holy Grail.
Yes.
So there's other things that the police officers and things. You could tell a police officer, this guy's threatened to hurt people. Well, did he hurt anybody yet? No, can't do anything.
Yes.
So the idea of, and you know what, man, in the last few months, I've received so many phone calls from school districts whose 6 and 7-year-old children are killing themselves.
It's just unbelievable.
It's hard to believe it. But when I was, first of all, I never heard about it when I was going to school, but it went from suicide to homicide. These kids are killing themselves at a record level. It's epidemic. Number 1 or number 2 cause of death in every state in the United States.
Going to take a break and continue our conversation with Rocky Malloy. Again, National School Chaplain Association. You can go to the website. We'll talk more about it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Former Senator Ben Sasse has been in the news recently because he's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. But even with this diagnosis, he has been speaking and writing. His latest op-ed warns that the indoor childhood is bad for America. Now, we know that the current digital revolution is changing nearly every aspect of modern life, but the issue, he believes, is greater than screen time. He points to a larger problem. American children are being weirdly held hostage indoors. A recent survey from the Institute for Family Studies discovered that a majority of 6-year-olds have unsupervised access to internet-connected tablets, but that same majority are not allowed to play in their own yards unsupervised. It doesn't get much better for older kids. More than half of 14-year-olds don't have permission to leave their streets. He laments that we aren't introducing children to a world in an age-appropriate manner. Instead, we are preventing them from developing imagination, resilience, and grit. They can explore the dark corners of the internet, but cannot explore their own neighborhoods. Parents are ignoring one danger in one area and overprotecting in another. He reminds us that 11 of the 12 Apollo astronauts who walked on the moon were Boy Scouts who learned to live by the Scouts' motto, "Be prepared." Unfortunately, we are not raising a generation of risk-takers today. Children need to learn from low-risk failures. Instead, they're being tossed into the deep end of adulthood with little preparation. The children aren't at fault. The parents are failing their children and the next generation. The solution starts at home. It's time to get children outdoors. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today about the National School Chaplain Association. Rocky Malloy with us. And Rocky, for just a minute, let me just mention that if people want to maybe dip their toe into the water, there's a video that's about 2 minutes long. Of course, your book, which we've mentioned before, School Chaplain, there's a place where they can click to learn more. But then they might say, okay, what do I need to do next? And that is you have a free introductory course which really gets you into what that would require in terms of skills. And that's step one. Then step two gets into, of course, more difficult things, certainly accreditation and certification. You have to complete the NSCA Academy coursework and gain a national recognized chaplaincy certificate. And then eventually, step three, which is not necessarily going to take that long if you really are diligent, you can begin to serve in a public school, private school, charter school, and there's just some great opportunities, and I suspect this is a good example where you have more people looking for a chaplaincy in their public schools than you have recruits, which is one of the reasons we're talking about that today here on Point of View, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it is.
Because it seems to me... Yeah, go ahead.
Oops, sorry. You perfectly outlined it. There is one caveat. If you're already working in a school, you're the perfect candidate to become a certified chaplain because you're already there, you already have relationships, and we'd love to talk to you.
That's a good idea because there are people that have been volunteers. That could be moms that are volunteers or dads that help coach or something like that. If you've already got a connection to your public school or your Christian school, then in some respects, all we're doing is adding the various layers that give you the accreditation, the certification, all of that. And so that is something that comes together pretty quickly then if you already have that relationship and you've already used some of those schools, won't it?
Yes, it puts you in a position that's accredited and trained. A lot of people are really already doing this kind of behavior, but the training gives them clear boundaries of what is and what is not constitutionally. And what we've seen is it's like a playground when there's a fence. Kids can play right up to the fence. If they're not, kids have the tendency to draw back. So this gives qualified adults, the liberty to exercise their First Amendment right of free exercise.
What are the limits to what can be done here? Because as I go to your website, we, of course, also are talking not only about public schools, but we could be talking about universities, organizations. I'm very familiar with the fact that there are a number of businesses that have chaplains. So, what are the opportunities? It seems to me that even though we talk about what's happened in the public schools, it seems like the opportunities are even broader than that, aren't they?
Yes, sir. Multiple federal organizations have talked to us, like when President Trump signed the Continuity Act for children aging out of foster care, that deployed potentially chaplains in HHS helping children move to HUD communities. Right now, that's not happening. Also, DHS, SBA, multiple organizations have reached out to us because finally there is a civilian chaplains corps, which we were asked to create, which has been fully created and ready to operate.
Let's talk about impact for just a minute, since I was trying to talk about how big this is, because as I understand it, you have been able to develop this in a number of schools around the country and in a number of countries. So what are the latest numbers?
We have, in round numbers, 50,000 chaplains working in 22 countries, 23 if we count the United States. That's about 41,000 schools, or 37 million people in this being ministered to by chaplains. And the impact is phenomenal. Up to 80% reduction of teen pregnancies, 37% increase in graduations, dramatic reduction in violence at home and at school, reduction in bullying. In essence, everything you want good goes up and everything that's negative goes down, because there's a person in school that represents God in the ethics and morals.
And I think what is so exciting, as you pointed out, people tend to think about this in terms of suicide or acting out in terms of a school shooting, but lowering teen pregnancy, lowering bullying, lowering violence, increasing academic performance, graduation rates go through the roof, all sorts of things that you would want. And so sometimes you run into some administrator saying, I don't know about that. Start just listing all the positives there, and you can see, indeed, that is the case. But for just another few minutes, let's focus on the kind of person that would be good to be a chaplain. You have a whole section in your presentation about embrace your calling, because being a chaplain is a calling, and it does seem to me that this is a real opportunity if you really love kids, or you would love to get out in the community, you'd love to meet and minister to people's needs, you'd like to use your God-given gifts. This is just a great avenue on which you can not only do that, and of course you can do that as a volunteer, but to do that with some credibility once you are accredited and have certification.
Kerby, you do such a great job. That's exactly right. Most people are drawn to ministry in this area because they don't want to be a pastor. I mean, the way we kind of look at it, well, you can only serve God if you're a pastor, kind of. I mean, people are serving God in the marketplace. You're serving the Lord. So I want to try to take that away. The average school is 1,000 people. Day one, you step into that environment, you have 1,000 people that you can minister to. The average church in the world, even in the United States, is about 120 people.
One of the other things I think is very exciting is if you're a chaplain in a local school, you might think, well, I feel like a lone ranger, but you have put together a network of others. So if you get into an issue where you feel like you're over your head, or maybe you need to share it with somebody else, because you're part of a network, you can talk to other chaplains who either maybe have dealt with that or have some expertise, or at least provide a listening ear. And that's something that works very well as well.
Yes, we have local chapters for chaplains, and we have a senior chaplain board. Our chief of chaplains is the former chief of chaplains for the U.S. Army, a 2-star general. So he's well equipped to take care of people, and he's recruited a board of flag officers and senior field officers. So we can really support someone that's operating in this manner.
Well, just again, remind people what they can do, how to get started. We have a link to NSCA, which stands again for National School Chaplain Association, nsca.global. You can find, of course, the link on the website, pointofview.net, and tell them where to go, what to click on, and how to get started.
Go to the website and go to the academy. There's where the free course is and the video, and we try to answer all of your questions, but as soon as you contact us, you'll be given access to a lady named Lorena who can answer all of your questions and walk you through the entire process.
And again, there's some buttons that you can click on there: chaplains, partners, getting involved, news, media, as well as some other things about us, which gives you a way in which you can contact those individuals. And all of that is available at their website, NSCA, which we've provided for you today. And again, you can also, of course, find all of those links necessary by simply going to the website, pointofview.net. Rocky, it was great to have you in studio last time, and it was great to have you by phone. And let's see if we can encourage some more people listening to this to go out there and make a difference in their local schools and communities. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, sir. You're helping change the culture of the United States to bring us back to the greatness.
Well, again, Rocky Malloy, and again, all that information is on our website. So if you're driving right now, don't have a chance to write it down, or you want to pass this on to someone else, and you may know somebody you think, that would be a person that would be ideal as a chaplain, you can take this and pass that on to them, show them the link, and all of the rest. Just before we take a break at the bottom of the hour, I did want to mention that we are coming to the end of our fiscal year. And that's an opportunity for us to see if we can balance our budget and move on into the rest of this year in good financial shape. And if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate that. There's a couple of ways you can be involved. First of all, you can go to the website there, which has a link which simply says Restoring America's Godly Heritage, Give Now. Just click on the button that says Give Now. We give you a suggestion on what you might want to do in terms of being involved. You can give a one-time gift or an ongoing monthly gift. Whatever you do, we'll leave that between you and the Lord. But this is a way in which, as we are educating you and your children and your grandchildren, your friends and your neighbors and all sorts of other individuals, certainly on this 250 years, we thought that this would be very appropriate for, as we talked in the first hour with Robert Morgan, and as we've just now talked with Robert Malloy, Rocky Malloy, we are certainly getting into some very important issues. So if you can join us, go to the website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to give us a call, 1-800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
America's founders called this nation an experiment. 250 years later, the question for us is, did the experiment work? Well, let's look at the history. Though not perfect, America has continued moving toward the promise of the Declaration that all men are created equal. Our nation has enjoyed amazing success and providential survival. So has the experiment succeeded? Well, yes, but will it succeed going forward? That depends on you. At Point of View, we know the American experiment owes its success to the biblical values upon which it was founded. Join Point of View this month as we work to restore a biblical worldview in American culture. Your gift will be doubled when you give by June 30th. Call or click today at pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just, as a program note, mention that Cindy Brinker-Simmons will be with us tomorrow. We'll be talking about her book, Restoration. We've had her on before. Thought it'd be good to get an update on all the things that have happened since she published the book. And a lot of what we will be talking about now, and we'll be talking about again in the second hour tomorrow, has to do with socialism. Nothing like electing another Democratic socialist for everybody starting to write about that. And it's something that we have been talking about for many years here on Point of View. And the first article that I have is from the Wall Street Journal, written by the editors of the Wall Street Journal, which has the title, The Rise of the Democratic Socialist. Because, as they've said, one of the stories of this year has been the rise of Democratic Socialists, because the reason they point this out is you now have another one, and that is avowed Democratic Socialists of America candidate Janice Lewis George won the Democratic nomination for mayor for Washington, D.C. last week, and, of course, it wasn't even close, and essentially that is it, because once you win the nomination, especially in the D.C. area, that's it. So she will be the next mayor, no doubt. And you add to her, of course, not only Zohran Mamdani, who is the mayor of New York City, you also, if you go to Los Angeles, have the person running against the current mayor, Karen Bass, is Nithya Raman, who is also a Democratic socialist. What I thought was interesting is they didn't mention our socialist up there in Seattle, but our second article gets into that as well. And so it isn't just that they are winning these mayor's race, one in New York City, one in Seattle, one in the D.C. area, but even a potential one in Los Angeles. There's also an attempt to try to seek some other gains in Congress. Of course, you have AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders in the Senate, but there are some attempts to do that as well. Zohran Mamdani has picked an individual who is also a proud member of the Democratic Socialist of America, an attempt to defeat an existing individual who is, interesting enough, the chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And the particular platform has everything from abolish ICE, create a 4-day, 32-hour work week, universal basic income, free government child care, free pre-K, free college, Medicare for all, including abortion, on and on and on and on and on. Again, one thing we've said about people that believe in socialism is they are absolutely convinced that money grows on trees. Just even to begin to think about what it would take to fund all of this. Everybody's for free until they realize that being free makes it really expensive because somebody has to pay for it. And I will get into the fact that this argument, which is a fallacious argument that will just tax the rich, doesn't work for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into some of that today, and we'll cover some of it again tomorrow, because it is more important, I think, than ever for us to take seriously this issue. Some of you might say, well, do you have resources at Point of View on the subject of socialism? Well, yes, we do. Years ago, I did a booklet on a biblical point of view on capitalism and socialism, which primarily was looking at the socialist arguments against capitalism. So then I produced another one, a biblical point of view on socialism, which looked at all the flaws of socialism. And then I thought, well, we need some other booklets, but these seem to have covered the waterfront. And then I said, well, wait a minute, let's take another one, and that is to look at the road to tyranny, the road to socialism, and begin to evaluate it using some of the key books that have been critiquing it as well. Because, as you well know, the younger you are, the more likely you are to believe that socialism is preferable to capitalism. Also, if you're a Democrat, more likely to believe that socialism is preferable to capitalism. So there is a real need, first of all, to talk about the value of private property, the value of certainly freedom, and the particular very sad record of socialist experiments in other countries. And it again is kind of intriguing because another one that is being proposed is an individual that is running for the state assembly in New York. And again, this individual, Nydia Velasquez, wants national rent control, again, a 4-day, 32-hour work week with no change in pay or benefits, abolishing ICE, passing Medicare for all, passing the Green New Deal, a federal freeze on residential electricity bills, and the list goes on and on and on. And if you are convinced that money grows on trees, well, then that works for you. But if you are convinced that you have to come up with the funds to make that work, that brings me to my next piece, and this one's written by an individual who's really writing columns for the Washington Post. So looking at it from a different point of view, but even so, the title of this particular piece, which comes from Megan McArdle, is "Socialism is Back in Vogue. Wait for Reality to Set In." Because she says it has never been a better time in America to be a socialist. She says we aging Gen Xers who thought that socialism had been refuted by the fall of the Berlin Wall have also been refuted ourselves. Democratic Socialists now run Seattle, New York City, and come January, the District of Columbia, with the election, as she points out, of Janice Lewis George. But she also points out that fully two-thirds, that would be 66% of Democrats, have told the Gallup poll they view socialism favorably, while only 42%, less than half, of Democrats say the same thing about capitalism. So you can see where the trend is going. The challenge, she says, is that socialism's rise is spiky, concentrated in blue cities where affluent but often downwardly mobile college graduates cluster, and of course points out that is a difficulty for the Democratic Party. But then she gets into the fact that, yes, you would like to have all these free programs, but somebody has to pay for it. And here she says, many of these services are often absurdly expensive for what they deliver. American infrastructure costs, for example, are a scandal, but every excessive cost is someone else's income, and that someone will fight like a cornered tiger if you try to reduce their income by one thin dime. This eats up fiscal capacity that might otherwise be used to fund new services. New York City, Seattle, Chicago, the District of Columbia are wrestling with major structural budget gaps. She is probably less critical of socialism, but she's trying to at least help some of her fellow Gen Xers and Gen Y individuals that this doesn't work very well. And she goes on to say that the progressivity of the tax code also complicates things on the reverse side. She says socialists may wax lyrical about a Nordic-style welfare state. That's why in one of the booklets I even answer, really is Sweden a Swedish socialist state? It's not, by the way. But those states are paid for by heavily taxing what? The middle class. That's you. An idea that is unlikely to gain much purchase, she points, with the educated base of the Democratic Socialists of America. Today's college-educated elite is voting for more public services, not less disposable income. But she says, unfortunately, New York City already gets roughly a third of its income revenue from millionaire filers. Those are individuals who are considered to be millionaires who have filed their taxes face a combined state, local, and federal marginal personal income tax that exceeds 50%. You think that's going to keep going for very long, especially since some of them have decided to leave, and I think you know what's going to happen there. The other thing is they say, well, we just need more federal funds. Well, if you've not noticed, the federal government is 40, well, we're not there yet. We're going to be there. $40 trillion in national debt. So it is not likely that you're going to get new federal funds, she says, given the national debt is around 100% of gross domestic products, more than that, and a Republican president sits in the White House. And so as a result, New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani, Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson, and the future, if you will, individual that will be the mayor of the D.C. area, Louis George, are already struggling with these issues. And she says, ironically, these dismal fiscal realities are part of what is boosting the fortunes of many of the socialists, because they're arguing, well, that's why we need more money, and yet there isn't any more money to obtain unless you start coming up with some very creative taxation strategies, which we've talked about before. Well, this deserves more attention, and we will give it tomorrow in the second article, because there are other articles I have found on socialism that are certainly relevant to this conversation, and it's not a conversation we're going to abandon anytime soon. We recognize that the trend is going in the wrong direction. There is a need for us to give very concrete and biblically based answers, and we will do so here on Point of View. But if you'd like to read two articles, one from the Wall Street Journal, one from an article, an op-ed in the Washington Post, they're on the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that tomorrow we will have Cindy Brinker-Simmons in studio. We'll talk about her book, Restoration, which I think is really a very good book and a very needed one, and we'll talk more about what that means. We will get back to this issue of socialism and a variety of others, but I thought I'd wind down today by talking about sports. For just a minute, it would be, I think, appropriate to talk about the fact that this World Cup, which has come to North America, most of the venues are in the United States, but some in Mexico, some in Canada, have really changed the European and Asian experience in America. Many of them even come away saying, I think we've been lied to, because when they come here, they say, why can't our country be like this? They go to Buc-ee's and they can't believe a gas station looks like this. They go to Texas Roadhouse and they can't believe the size of the steaks. They go to barbecue and can't believe how good it tastes, and they can't believe the experiences they're having at Chick-fil-A and the fact that they get free refills. And one person, especially at Texas Roadhouse, said, well, I didn't order any bread. Oh, no, this comes free. And they're going, what? I mean, and now they're starting to say, can we bring bottles of ranch dressing back to Europe and other places? It's been, I think, encouraging, if nothing else, to see other countries, people from other countries come to this country and be amazed at its abundance, to be amazed at the freedom that we have, to be amazed at how friendly Americans are. There have been a few exceptions, but very, very few, and they all talk about it, and I think it's been a great coming out party for the United States on our 250th anniversary. So anyway, while we're talking about sports, those are all positive, not to mention the fact that the U.S. soccer team is in the knockout round, so we will get to that. But I did post this because the other aspect of sports, which we talked about on Friday, was the reaction, the overreaction, I might say, to the fact that the San Francisco Giants, and I've always been a San Francisco Giant fan growing up there, watching Willie Mays and Willie McCovey and Orlando Cepeda and on and on and on. I mean, that's always been a great place. But at the same time, of course, we also recognize the emphasis on pride. And this particular article by Beckett Adams shows, if nothing else, the hypocrisy of the sports establishment. And in particular, he says sports journalists jettison their affection for silent protest, because they point out that when Colin Kaepernick kneeled, he was a hero. But when a few Giants players quoted the Bible, well, that's another story. And you may know that they were to wear these pride hats that have the rainbow. So their decision was, well, why not then put a Bible verse next to it, which of course is the rainbow that you actually read about in Genesis. And of course they get tremendous amount of heat for that. And so again, as he points out, the San Francisco Giants held a Pride Night recently in which players were expected to wear ball caps featuring the team's logo and the colors of the current rainbow pride flag, which includes the colors of the trans movement, by the way. That's why it looks so odd anymore. And they're supposed to put those along with their peanuts and Cracker Jacks and all those kinds of things. But nevertheless, what you see is that you get in trouble if you don't wear the right hat, you don't wear the right ribbon, you decide not to do something, and as a result, that gets you into trouble. And even if you just wear the normal hat, one of the players was his pitcher, I think it was a relief pitcher, Sam Hentges, actually said, well, I'll just wear the normal hat. And he gets lumped in and criticized, not because he defaced the hat, which is the argument being made here, but that he just wore the normal hat. So anytime people say, well, this pride-themed gear is optional, just look what happens to you if you decide, because it's optional, not to wear it, and you can get yourself in trouble as well. Well, Beckett Adams says, recall the Colin Kaepernick phenomenon, which this mid-tier NFL quarterback was declared a civil rights hero for refusing to stand for the national anthem. He says no one has yet explained how kneeling before the flag is an act of defiance rather than reverence, but we're long past that point. Since I don't have Steve Miller here today, since he's at his son's wedding, that's a conversation we've had off air. But nevertheless, the point is he was seen as a hero. Unless you forget, those of you that get Sports Illustrated, I don't, they actually gave him the Muhammad Ali Legacy Award because, and he also won the GQ Citizen of the Year. So obviously, if you kneel to protest something, well, that is a hero. But again, you can't do that for any other reason that might necessarily resonate with sort of Bible verses or the rest. And so again, the report that has come out more recently is efforts by the Major League Baseball teams to promote LGBTQ plus inclusivity during Pride Month haven't been embraced with open arms by some of the rank and file players, and the league's response is prompting criticism from prominent Republican politicians. If you haven't followed this, Senator Josh Hawley, our Senator Republican from Missouri, has already suggested maybe we should bring the MLB Commissioner, Rob Manfred, before Congress to discuss potential antitrust violations by the league, which currently enjoys an antitrust exemption. After all, if you're going to get upset about somebody putting a scripture verse on their hat next to a gay pride flag, maybe we should reevaluate what kind of benefits we give to you in that regard. And so, as some self-described gay Giants fans, they were evidently not going to be even happy if the offenders were fined or severely punished, but merely reprimanded. As somebody pointed out, the Giants' milquetoast response about pain and anger just doesn't cut it. So there are those who are not only willing to turn a blind eye to what actually took place with the San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick, but also to say that if you refuse to wear the hat or you put a Bible verse on the hat, you can't just be told that we are concerned about this and are going to look into this in the future because this might cause some pain or anger. We want to make sure that you get punished, maybe even get fired. And so the protest on both sides is pretty significant. But I thought it was a very good piece to remind you that all of a sudden, there is a real sense of outrage when somebody engages in what might be called a silent protest. What was sauce for the liberal LGBTQ individuals and for the BLM individuals with Colin Kaepernick is not sauce for the conservative gander in terms of those who felt that maybe putting a verse from the book of Genesis talking about the real significance of the rainbow is enough. But I just thought we would post that for you. We won't spend a lot of time talking about sports, although it is, back to our favorite topic, fascinating to watch the reaction of so many who have come to this country and been surprised in so many different ways during the World Cup. So we'll continue watching the World Cup. It'll be on for some time, and it will be a topic we'll address from time to time as well. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about that first interview you did with Robert Morgan on his book, 100 Bible Verses That Made America, you can go and listen to that interview again. You can pass it on to others. You can order a copy of the book, paperback or Kindle or even hardback, and I think there's even an audiobook, so there you go. We've made it pretty easy for you. If you'd like to know more about the National School Chaplain Association, we have that information there as well. Most importantly, I want to thank both the producer and the engineer, both named Megan, making this program possible. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. Not my words. That's Ronald Reagan, and he was right. We can't take our freedom for granted. For 250 years, those words in our Declaration of Independence acknowledging the human rights granted to all of us by our Creator have guided and inspired generations of Americans to protect the torch of freedom and pass it on to us. But will we pass that torch to the next generation? You can join a team dedicated to doing just that. In fact, Point of View has been passing on freedom and the biblical values that support it for over 50 years. Join us this month, and any donation you give will be doubled. Give at pointofview.net or call us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.